Have you ever been the last person somewhere? The last one in the office? The last to leave a party? There's a strange sort of quiet that falls, a feeling of being in a space that's not quite yours anymore. But what if you were the last passenger on a train journeying into the deep, dark night? That's exactly where our story begins tonight. It was the final departure from the city, the 11:58 p.m. express. A silver snake slithering out of the brightly lit station and into the inky blackness of the countryside. I was the only one in my carriage. In fact, as I walked down the aisle, peering into the other compartments, I realized I might be the only passenger on the entire train. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the track was a hypnotic drumbeat. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. The world outside was a blur of shadows and fleeting lights. I settled into a worn velvet seat, the kind that holds the memory of 1,000 other journeys. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching my own faint reflection superimposed over the dark Russian landscape. It was peaceful, almost meditative. Then the train began to slow. This was unexpected. According to the schedule, there were no more stops until my destination, a small, forgotten town hours away. We weren't pulling into a station either. The train hissed to a halt in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a thick, dark forest. The only light came from the dim emergency lamps inside the carriage. The familiar clickety-clack was replaced by an unsettling silence. My heart began to beat a little faster. An unscheduled stop in the dead of night in the middle of a forest? That's the beginning of a dozen horror stories I'd seen. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a signal failure or a minor mechanical issue. I waited. 1 minute. 5 minutes. 10. The silence stretched, becoming heavier, more oppressive. Just as I was about to get up and look for a conductor, I heard it. A soft sound from the end of the carriage. A door sliding open. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing in the empty train. They were coming closer. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone after all. The footsteps stopped right outside my compartment. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. The handle of my compartment door began to turn, slowly creaking with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the dead quiet. Who could it be? The conductor? Another passenger who had been hidden away? Or something else entirely? The door slid open and a figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It was an old man, much older than I would have expected to see on a late-night train. He wore a crisp, old-fashioned conductor's uniform, complete with a hat that shadowed his face. He didn't look at me, but instead gazed down the length of the train. "Apologies for the delay," he said, his voice a low, raspy whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "We're just waiting for our last passenger." I was confused. But I thought I was the last passenger, I stammered. He finally turned his head, and I saw his eyes. They were pale, almost colorless, and seemed to look right through me. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Almost," he said. "There's always one more." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and continued his slow walk down the aisle, his footsteps receding until they vanished completely. The train remained stationary. The old conductor's words echoed in my mind. "We're just waiting for our last passenger." A chill, unrelated to the cool night air, crept over my skin. I peered out the window again, into the impenetrable darkness of the woods. What kind of passenger would board a train in the middle of a forest, in the middle of the night? And then I saw it. A light. A single flickering light, like an old lantern, bobbing through the trees. It was moving towards the train. As it drew closer, I could make out a figure holding it. A small figure. It was a child, a little girl in a simple white dress, her face pale and serious. She wasn't walking on a path. She seemed to glide over the forest floor, the lantern held out in front of her like a beacon. She reached the side of the train and stopped, looking up directly at my window. Her eyes met mine. There was no fear in them, only a profound, ancient sadness. She raised a small hand and pointed, not at me, but at something behind me, further down the carriage. The train lurched forward, its engines rumbling back to life. As we began to move, the little girl and her lantern were swallowed by the darkness once more. The journey had resumed. The train picked up speed, the familiar clickety-clack a comforting rhythm once more, but nothing felt the same. The empty seats around me seemed less empty now. The air was thick with unanswered questions. Who was the old conductor? And who was the little girl in the woods? Were they ghosts, memories tied to this old railway line? As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in shades of gray and pink, I knew this was a journey I would never forget. It made me wonder, how many stories do these old trains carry? How many last passengers have they collected on their endless journeys into the night? Sometimes the most memorable journeys aren't about the destination, but about the strange, unexplained moments along the way. Thank you for joining me on this one. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the unknown. See you next time.